with Harvard being the institution that it is, Doc,
Mm-hmm.
it represents a lot for a lot of people. It represents so much for America. But then to have this, and I don't want to say it's a bombshell, because I don't know if we are truly surprised that this institution was connected to the transatlantic slave trade the way it was.
Right.
And when we start to look at it, they put out this 134-page report detailing various elements. And I'm looking at the report right now, Doc.
Okay.
I mean, they broke it down into various sections or chapters, rather. They have an introduction, slavery in New England and at Harvard, financial ties, Harvard and the slave economy. They have chapter 4, intellectual leadership, Harvard slavery and its legacies before and after the Civil War. Chapter 5 is the long legacies of slavery, segregation, marginalization, and resistance. And then they have chapter 6, which is a conclusion. And then chapter 7 is recommendations to the president and fellows of Harvard College. And then there's 2 appendices attached to this report. First and foremost, when you heard this announcement from Harvard, what was going through your mind? Were you surprised, or were you like,
no, not
finally?
No, not in the least. Harvard had to get in the game. I mean, it had already been beaten to the punch by our sister Ruth Simmons, who, of course, convened the conversation at Brown University. Ruth Simmons was the first woman of African descent, first person of African descent to be the president of an Ivy League school when she took over Brown University some years ago. And she convened, as a former African-American studies professor, Dr. Simmons, a committee to investigate the role of Brown in enslavement. And of course, she retired from Brown to great fanfare, and then decided to return to the South. She's from Louisiana, and she is just now retiring from being the president of Prairie View A&M. So Dr. Simmons kind of pointed the way to this. And as they mentioned in the report, in the recommendations phase, section 7, they note her. And they also note some other places. Princeton Theological Seminary, which has created a $27.6 million reparative endowment. Brown pledged $10 million. 10 was raised by private donors, and $8 million from the Brown Corporation. And we know that, I'll quote Scott Galloway, professor at NYU, who calls these Ivy League schools and others who are Ivy adjacents, the Stanfords, the Universities of Chicago, basically the NYUs. They're basically hedge funds who admit the children of the donors and a few other exceptional Negroes and others, and burnish their brands. So Harvard was a little bit behind the curve. Georgetown had raised some money, and they're talking about descendants of those who were enslaved. They mentioned the University of Glasgow, in fact, in the Harvard report. So Harvard, of course, is Harvard, which means, oh, we can't let these other schools outdo us. So they are going to set aside $100 million in an endowed fund to basically engage in forms of, I don't know, they don't call it reparations. They wouldn't be that silly. That would get them on the hook. I'm sure their lawyers workshopped every line in what they wrote. But, in the case of Brown, they put together some money for K-12 students in Providence, Rhode Island. They engaged in loan forgiveness for students, fellowships in terms of slavery studies. In terms of Harvard, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, finally. Harvard created some recommendations that, if nothing else, will burnish the Harvard reputation. So no, I'm not surprised at all. And anybody who wants to read about the role of enslavement in the Ivy League, get Craig Stephen Wilder's book, Professor Wilder's book, Ebony and Ivy, where he basically traces the impact of enslavement and the creation of the Ivy League schools, all of them. So you can just get it in one book. So no, I wasn't surprised at Harvard at all.
Would you recommend that people take a look at this report, this 134-page report?
Absolutely. I think it's a masterpiece of forensic science. I mean, I love it. I mean, I was telling Joel and you before we came on, I mean, I've kind of been laughing. There have been a couple of moments I laughed out loud. Not at the tragedy of enslavement, of course, because we, of course, are victims of that, ongoing victims in the afterlife, but laughing at the kind of aggrandizement of Harvard's resources. Sven Burkett, who has written a number of studies talking about enslavement, he's got a book called Empire of Cotton. As it is noted, Burkett and his students, including undergraduate students, have been tracing some of this stuff for a very long time. And now, you know, in the wake of the reckoning of 2020, so-called, and of course, President Bacow in 2019 called this piece together, you know, Burkett plays a valuable role. And there's some top-notch scholars involved in the committee that was pulled together. Tamiko Brown-Nagin, who we've talked about before, you know, Professor Nagin at the dean of the Radcliffe Institute, professor of law at Harvard, who just wrote a great book on Constance Baker Motley, Evelyn Hammonds, Annette Gordon-Reed. I mean, there are a number of people, but again, reinforcing the Harvard brand. I started to say Howard, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Right.
Little Sisters of the Poor Benefits Association, that is recommendation number 3, I think it is. Building partnerships is what they call it. But we'll talk about that with HBCUs.
Right. So, folks, I would advise folks that are watching today, if you want to get a copy of the report, you can download it for free at legacyofslavery.harvard.edu /report. legacyofslavery.harvard.edu /report. And you can read the report for those who are interested, those who would like to see what Harvard has to say about their involvement with slavery. This is an opportunity for you to see it. Dr. Carr, when we look at this, $100 million, and my first thought was, well, where did they get this number from? First, even before the number, what was the impetus of even creating a committee? And I know you mentioned everybody else was kind of doing it, but do you feel like there was a singular incident that was like, you know what, we need to do this? Or is it just a number of things that happened over the past couple of years? And you know, whether it's George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, whether it's, you know, all of those things, what do you think really got Harvard saying, okay, enough is enough, we got to say something?
Well, Harvard is the brand, as we know. It's not the King's College in New York, which was later renamed Columbia University. It's not any of the others. It's not Yale. It's Harvard. Harvard is the American Oxford, the American Cambridge, the American University of Berlin. It is the brand by which all other universities are measured. So $100 million is a lot more than 27.6. $100 million is more than 10. In other words, the number, I'm not going to say it's arbitrary, but it's a nice round number that it adds a zero to anybody else. You know,
right.
You know, and
it's big. It sounds substantial and significant.
No question. And just like Mackenzie Scott, who has given away millions in unrestricted funds in terms of philanthropic efforts to historically Black colleges, tribal colleges, and other institutions, the money on her Amazon stock has made that money back that she gave away and more since she's been giving it away. Harvard's not going to miss $100 million, and it's an endowment. It's not direct investment. It's not like they're saying, okay, we're going to give $10 million to 10 different HBCUs to do what you want. No, it's not. No, it's not that. It's not like they're saying we're going to endow several K-12 institutions and you can do what you want with the money. In other words, it's not a form of reparations. It's really the money's not really going anywhere in terms of, you know, Harvard is going to, and for some of that money, I'm sure, pay itself. And you know, they're offering, among other things, the possibility of exchange programs with Harvard faculty and HBCU faculty. Now, maybe they're going to pay the HBCU faculty salaries when they come work at Harvard. But of course, that would mean that the HBCUs would have to pay the Harvard salaries, which would actually hurt the HBCUs. Anyway, I'm not sure how that's going to work. But the point is that that $100 million is not being given away. To quote the line from the Jimmy Stewart film, It's a Wonderful Life, Potter's not selling, Potter's buying. But at any rate, so that they're burnishing their reputation. Now, is it better to have this money than not set aside? Of course, it's better to have this money set aside. But I'm not surprised at all. In fact, when the opening at the beginning of chapter 1, the first line in the report said Harvard's motto, Veritas, which means truth, of course, inscribed on gates, doorways, and sculptures all over campus, demands of us truth. And as you know, brothers, as it is said to have been said to Pontius Pilate, when Pontius Pilate said, "What is the truth?" and would not stay for an answer. So when you read the report, the truth of the matter is a great deal of it is big up in Harvard. It's big up. In fact, when I first saw the story break and downloaded the report, I went looking for the things about Harvard that I expected Harvard to lift up. Who are the exceptional Negroes that it is let in? So I went looking for the HBCU folk. The Du Bois is in there, of course. Eva Beatrice Dykes, a lot of people don't know her. She was at Oakwood College. She came out of DC, went to Dunbar High School, went to Howard, came to Harvard. They said, we don't count the Howard degree. You got to take a Harvard degree. They talk about that in there. Richard T. Greener, who was the dean of Howard's Law School, was a graduate of Harvard University. He's in there. But what I'm looking for, and then I started reading the footnotes. And as I read the footnotes, what I noticed, take Eva Dykes, for example. I'm looking at Eva Beatrice Dykes, who was the first woman of African descent to qualify for a PhD, complete the requirements for a PhD in history. One of 3 Black women who graduated PhDs the year she graduated. And I'm looking at the footnotes, and what I see accessed is the Radcliffe archives for the things they have in their archives of Eva Dykes. I said, that's cool. But what I didn't see were the books written by Black scholars, including a cat at Oakwood for years, talking about Eva Dykes. I'm like, how did Harvard evade the opportunity to quote Black scholars writing at Black institutions about somebody they're saying was a person who suffered racism at the place that, well, I tell you, chef's kiss. So yeah, you gotta read it, man. Forensic science. It's a beautiful elevation of the Harvard brand in a kind of moment of, I don't want to call it cosplay, but self-flagellation in pursuit, as they said, of something that ends of them. Truth. Anyway, we'll see.
Folks, we are having a conversation around Harvard claiming or saying that they're going to commit $100 million to create a legacy of slavery fund after they have come out with a 134-page report outlining their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. This report of the Presidential Committee on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery shows intimately, based upon their history, their research, and the work that was done by their committee, that Harvard gained and benefited from slavery. And so they are trying to come clean with this report and with other ideas and goals to address this issue. We've been talking to Dr. Greg Carr, who is a professor of Africana Studies at Howard University and is the host of the Black Star Network's The Black Table. Dr. Carr, I want to throw up here just something that they put out. This is what Harvard put out. Keenan, if we could post this quote on the screen, talking about what Harvard is planning to do, some of their key goals in this whole effort. They are planning to address slavery legacy. The report calls for spending the money in a multitude of tracks. 1, by tracing the modern day descendants of enslaved people at Harvard. 2, by building memorials and curriculum to honor and expose the past. Number 3, by creating exchange programs between students and faculty members at Harvard and those at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and by collaborating with tribal colleges. And 4, by forging partnerships to improve schools in the American South and the West Indies, where plantation owners and Boston Brahmins made their intertwined fortunes on the backs of the enslaved. Seems like these are very lofty goals here. And Dr. Carr, when you look at goals like this, I mean, I'm talking about the memorials, the curriculum, and they said that even that a lot of these goals are vague on purpose because they wanted to hear feedback from other folks within the Harvard community and outside of the Harvard community to add to it. But do you think this is a good start? These four goals, is this a good start for us?
It's a great start for Harvard. I don't think anybody should be applauded for confessing to a crime.
Right, and that's fact.
So I'm always wary when we celebrate having been abused when an abuser says I did it. That doesn't really change the relationship And in reading through the recommendations, I understand they were intentionally vague. The direct descendants, I love this one. Let me read it again. It says, we further recommend that in recognition of its lineage, the university engage with these descendants through dialogue, programming, information sharing, relationship building, and educational support. Through such efforts, these descendants can recover their histories, blah, blah, blah. The last one there, educational support. So you're giving scholarships? Now, in the case of Georgetown, which offered assistance to those who are direct descendants of those who were enslaved under Georgetown's auspices, including several Africans who were actually sold to keep the university's doors open, those people still have to satisfy Georgetown's entrance requirements. So, we'll see. I mean, and that's just in terms of the people who can trace. Now, mind you, there is a lawsuit. Tamara Lauren is having a lawsuit because one of her ancestors is in that photograph collection that is at Harvard, that Harvard now claims that it owns. I mean, so they're in court about that. So you got a direct chance to do the right thing there. But let's move on quickly because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. The enduring partnerships thing was interesting. The visiting appointments between HBCU faculty and Harvard faculty, that's interesting. Okay, as I mentioned before, the other thing they said is maybe they're going to establish a Du Bois Scholar Exchange. So HBCU students, junior level and above, can come to Harvard, and Harvard students can go to HBCUs. Now, that kind of exchange program has existed for years among HBCUs and HWCUs. But here's what I found out at Howard in 22 years of teaching. There are several Ivy League schools who stopped doing it. Why? Because the Black students would spend a semester at Howard and say, yeah, we good. We're not going back. So they started transferring to the HBCU.
Wow.
So when I saw Harvard saying they want to establish this, my first question, and it's an open question, is, did you all have one before and then you stopped it? Because I know several schools in the Ivy League, which I won't name, and Ivy adjacents, who canceled doing it because the Black students were coming and staying. So again, there's nothing in this report that doesn't help Harvard. In fact, I'll mention this finally, Appendix 2, the note on process. They talk about all the things all the people they consulted, the librarians and things like that. They said they consulted librarians at several schools, including Howard, that digitized information for them. Well, that led me to this other question in number 3, enduring partnerships. They want to digitize collections at HBCUs to help them, what they call it, safeguard these materials. Safeguard? Really? They did. There's a partnership between Princeton and Harvard right now that is digitizing the records of the Black Teachers Association, Pre-Integration Teachers Association. It's being headed by 2 fine Black scholars, one at Princeton, one at Harvard. Again, I won't name them. Y'all can look it up for yourself. My question is, how y'all gonna digitize institutional records of Black institutions that were preserved and fought during Jim Crow to end Jim Crow, and now the stuff end up at your house? Y'all ain't slick. It's going to, and then now you'll invite 2 or 3 remarkable Negroes up there. Maybe you'll give them a Carnegie or they'll get a MacArthur Genius Grant. And what you now have said is, look at us. Look at how great we are. We're helping these. Meanwhile, the institutions themselves, maybe they'll get a couple of exchange students, a couple of exchange faculty to burnish the fact that they've worked among the Negroes. But look at how they watch it. When y'all read this, look at how they characterize HBCUs. Look on page 9 when you see HBCUs first mentioned, and they talk about them doing the best they could, but ultimately not having the resources to be. You know what? Just cut a check. Y'all love Du Bois so much.
Cut a check.
Write Fisk a $50 million check, no strings attached. That ain't no money. You'll make it back in 6 months on your endowment. Write him a $50 million check, but you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that at all.
So I mean, and so it like, going piece by piece, looking at each one of these goals, I'm wondering, I mean, there were Black people in the room. There were Black people at the table.
Yeah. So
how was it that they were in the room at the table, but yet these goals, these recommendations still come across as being Harvard's recommendations, Harvard beneficial?
Because they're of Harvard. And this is not a criticism of any of them. Certainly not William Julius Wilson, certainly not Tia Miles or any of the other. And I mentioned those 2 in particular because Tia Miles is a younger scholar and William Julius Wilson is one of the most respected Black scholars in the country. This isn't the William Julius Wilson of 40 or even longer years ago, writing in the Negro Digest, Black World, debating about the future of HBCUs. This is the William Julius Wilson who was recruited by Henry Gates and others into Harvard when they were building that dream team, when Gates and Cornell West and William Julius Wilson and others were brought to Harvard. And then the other Ivy Leagues started doing the same thing. You know, I'm not critical of any of those Black scholars, any of those Black academics, because they are part of that system. And in those debates and rooms, you know, this is a very rich report. They're not ducking some of the difficult things that are raised. At the same time, they are part of that institution. In other words, reparations is about a lot more than burnishing the institutions that benefited from the enslavement of Black people. If you're talking about real reparations, you're talking about repair. So I don't have any problem with that. Now, if all those faculty decided that they were going to resign and come work at HBCUs, I'd be like, okay, that's interesting. Go on, because HBCUs aren't the answer either. Harvard is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. What's the situation for poor Black people and brown people in Cambridge? Just like Yale is in New Haven. Anybody been to New Haven know that there's Yale and there's the hood. So I'm saying, you know, at least with Ruth Simmons and Brown, they're talking about the surrounding area there, or around Brown. Now, so I don't think Harvard is excluding any of that. What I'm saying is, as you say, if this is the start and they kept it intentionally flexible, let's see what happens next. And, you know, we'll all wait and see.
So speaking of reparations, I mean, you talked about Professor Tamika Brown-Nagin.
Yes.
And she put out, she said in an interview last month, just before this came out, of course, that they were being intentional about making sure that this $100 million is not seen as reparations, because she said, quote, reparations means different things to different people. So fixating on that term, I think, can be counterproductive.
Absolutely.
So do you think that was the right decision for them to not frame this as part of a reparations conversation?
I know they be leaving themselves open to very real critique, because reparations means one thing. And Professor Brown-Nagin, a brilliant scholar, on the faculty at the law school, Tamika Brown-Nagin got a JD. She know damn well you better not call this reparations. So you know, you have to be intentional. You can't, of course it's not reparations. You can't talk about reparations. A professor at Columbia, my friend Catherine Frankie, who wrote a book called Repair several years ago that I actually teach at Howard Law School. This is a white woman, radical scholar at the law school, to whom I've sent students. In fact, one of my best students, Brother Jalil Muhammad. He grew up in the Nation of Islam. Jalil is graduating from Columbia Law in a couple of weeks.
Wow, I know Brother Jalil.
You know Jalil. Jalil is my man.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Jalil is a brilliant scholar, and she's got him working on this reparations work. He's extending her work. What Catherine Frankie said is, my ancestors benefited from enslavement, even though I am not from people who were here. But I came here, and guess what I got coming here? Whiteness. She said, you know what? I think there should be perhaps a wealth transfer tax, and that money be put in a common fund. You can have community land trust, you can have education, you can have all. She writes about this in her book Repair. Harvard not talking about that. And Professor Brown-Nagin knows good and well they're not talking about that. So of course now when she says we shouldn't get fixated on it, I suspect that part of the reason that you don't want to get fixated on it is because that will require more of that institution than you are willing to call it your own. And when you read this report and you look at the history of Ewart Grenier, for example, who founded the African American Studies program at Harvard, whose daughter Lonnie, of course, we know, the jurist, and who Bill Clinton sold out. When you look at all these things in that report, when you look at William Hastie, Charles Hamilton Houston, the people who Harvard produced, Eva Dykes, W.B. Du Bois, most of them, many of them in that group, came out of HBCUs. Now, if there's going to be a wealth transfer to HBCUs to train more students, that would look more like reparations, because you benefited from HBCU faculty. In fact, they said in the report, these HBCU undergrads you sent to us burnished our reputation, even though from 1898 to 1940, there were about 60 Black people in the Harvard student body at Harvard College. So the Negroes you did send here were superstars. And the Negroes who are there now are superstars and want to continue to shine in a firmament that they would not want to diminish by continuing to hold it to account in a way that might cost them their jobs. So I don't have no critique of them. They want to stay working on John Harvard's. I started calling it John Harvard's plan.
Right.
Anyway, but I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna call it John Harper's plantation. I'm not gonna call it. I'm not gonna, even though as they detail in the report,
Right.
the literal seal of the law school for years, that sheaf of wheat in the middle was a gesture toward the enslaved plantations, out of which they got their donations and their profits and their investment returns on investments for loans. Oh, they detail it beautifully in the report. What you gonna do about it? We're gonna set up a fund and talk about it.
That's and see, Doc, and Dr. Carr, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm still not hearing. Give me the substance. You know what I'm saying? I feel like we're getting the appetizer, but we're not at the main course right now. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, like when you're talking about reparations, I know part of the conversation has been on education in terms of, okay, the descendants of enslaved people should be going to certain Ivy League schools like Harvard, Yale, free of charge.
Mm-hmm. Or better yet, going to HBCUs and other schools with some of that Harvard money. That would be reparations.
Wow.
See, but how's it repaired when you basically, in fact, the last thing they write in the conclusion is much remains to be done as we seek to live up to our highest ideals. But by undertaking these endeavors in good faith and with a commitment to meaningful action, the university imbues Veritas with new meaning and renews its commitment to excellence. Wait a minute, is that the same commitment to excellence you had when them enslaved Africans was working on the?
Come on.
So what you talking about? No.
And and Dr. Carr, explain this to me, because you've been in academia for years. You understand the dynamics. You understand the power players. You understand how everything works out.
Some of it.
What you say some of it, but when we look at this situation, I mean, like, HBCUs are struggling. HBCUs in this country are struggling. They're still trying to make ends meet, right? Whether you're talking about Morgan, Howard, any HBCU, they're struggling. We're still petitioning. I'm gonna use that term lightly. The government for more assistance.
Yes.
But then you have institutions like Harvard, like Columbia, like Yale. Harvard has an endowment. Check this out, folks, of $53 billion.
Wait, what? Never slaying. 53 billion, baby.
$53 billion.
Wait a minute, how much is a billion? A billion is how many million? A billion is 1,000 million, right?
Right.
If you set aside 100 million, you set aside 1/10 of a billion, and you got 53. Well, man, they're gonna make their money back by the time the show is over.
50, or by the time the show is over.
And they didn't even give it out. It's an endowment, meaning what? We are setting it aside and keeping control of it. Come on, y'all.
That's what I'm saying. So I feel like there needs to be, I mean, the gap of inequality between HBCUs and the little money that HBCUs are getting versus these larger institutions. And I'm thinking to myself, it can't be that difficult to come up with a strategy or way to bring some real equity in it. And I always say this, Dr. Carr, and I've been saying this, please correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. King said, "Is always the right is never the wrong time to do the right thing."
No question.
And so it's like at this point,
that's right.
At this point, I'm convinced that you just don't have the will. You really just don't have the will to do the right thing.
Right.
So I mean, like I hear what Harvard is saying, and I think, hell, any institution, any business or corporation, I think they all gain. If you're talking about Ford Motor Company, you talk whatever industry, they have all benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. They have all benefited on the backs of our people. But at this point, the admission is that's nothing to me. No. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Substantially.
I don't have any real criticism of Harvard because I don't have any expectations of Harvard. See, this is the thing. I mean, the idea is that we have these expectations. And so when you talk about the endowment, Howard is the closest HBCU to $1 billion endowment. It's just south of $1 billion. It's now in the high 800s. There's no other HBCU that's close. Spelman, I think, is second. They may be over the $300 million mark. But there aren't 10 HBCUs among the 103 or 4 or 5. And shout out to Morris Brown for reacquiring accreditation in the AUC, there aren't even 10 that have $100 million or more. And Harvard's sitting on 53 plus and making money every day with investments that speak to their participation in predatory lending, capitalism, this kind of thing. And in the report, they talk about the challenges Black students and others have made to how they invest their money. But, you know, again, I don't have any criticism. I'm glad that this report came out. I think it sets a model and a template for this, for how to understand how higher education works at that level.
Yeah.
But I do think, though, finally, Faraji, that our challenge, and you've covered this extensively, brother, in the culture over the time that you've been on the air, it involves the least of these: forgiving student debt, lowering tuition costs, addressing K-12. And what Harvard has said in this report is we want to help with all of those things by sourcing our Harvard scholars that have analyzed this material. And yeah, okay, so you're going to burnish yourself for writing new reports on K-12 education and interface with school districts. You're going to do that for free now, right? Okay, or better yet, you're going to go in these school districts with your brilliant analysis at the Harvard School, Graduate School of Education, and you're going to help them acquire the similar type of brilliant analysis, and then you're going to get out of their way, right? You're going to show up without the Harvard brand, right? Hell no, you're not going to do that because you want credit for it. And as you said, I mean, one thing about virtue signaling is signaling is key. It's got to be Harvard that does this. So yeah, nah.
So I guess that leads us to the next question. I mean, since you don't have any expectations, should we even have a discussion about accountability, holding them accountable?
Yeah. I mean, that's recommendation number 7, ensure institutional accountability.
Dr. Carr, you a trip, brother.
No, they are, man, but this is what I love. This is what I love. They say they're going to set up an accountability institutional apparatus.
You can't do that.
Sure you can.
No, you can't, Dr. Carr. Look, it's like, hey, Doc. Hey, Doc, hey, look, brother. It's like when the police department.
Exactly.
When the police department has, and we're going to talk about this today on the show. The police department whipping our ass, right?
Faraji,
and then be like, we're going to have our internal affairs investigate.
Yes, sir. You are a national treasure, brother. That's when you put it. You put it exact. That is the perfect analogy, brother.
Like, how you going to investigate yourself,
brother? Well, or maybe you wait 20 or 30 years, and you go get the people who wrote The Wire, and you make an HBO series on corrupt cops and pay yourself again. Hey, wait a minute! They came back to your hometown to make another show about dirty cops. And get some awards. I mean, we've seen this show before.
I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get it.
Yes, you do.
That is the craziest thing in the world. I don't get it. How do you investigate yourself? Brother. And then you like, it's like the conversation I think we had on Brother Roland's show, just in terms of these companies that say they want to give some money for racial justice. And then, or they give themselves, they like pat themselves on the back.
No question.
And it's like, that is counterproductive to what we're trying to do, to the progress we're talking about here. You can't investigate yourself. So, I mean, and I'm saying, is there, and please pardon, let me know if I don't know, because I really don't know, Doc. Is there a way or a commission or a group or institute or think tank, somebody that can go to these institutions and say, okay, you are at a place that you want to redress this your grievance or your ties to slavery. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going as outside independent group of individual scholars and researchers and historians, we're going to hold you accountable. And if you don't live up to our standards of accountability, then you owe us.
Yeah.
Is there?
Absolutely. In the appendix 2, you'll see, for example, the consultancies they engaged in. They had all these dialogues. They brought people in to have conversations, and that's beautiful. One of the recommendations they want to do when they deal with Native Americans, they want to have a landmark conference with the Native American program at Harvard to advance national dialogue on the histories and legacies of indigenous slavery and colonialism, all this kind of thing. And I'm sure there will be publications and there will be academic accolades and this kind of thing. But here, what you just said, and they say this at the end of their report, they say, the entanglements we've had with enslavement are in the past. They can't be undone, but the present and future are ours as a university community to shape. Now, of course, within that field, here's a solution based on what you just said, Brother Faraji. Let's say Harvard says, we're going to put 10, 20, $30 million into establishing an independent, almost like a community review board.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And we encourage, and next thing you know, because see, this other thing about Harvard did it. So guess what? Yale working on their report somewhere. Columbia, already, they got to get their report. Okay. Again, go get Craig Stephen Wilder's book. You probably already gonna pay him a consultancy or get him to come in and give a talk. But anyway, now you've established this separate institution and you leave it alone.
Yeah.
And you don't, this is the other thing you don't do. You don't populate it with your faculty members.
That's right.
It's not the usual suspects. And you don't build links with Social Science Research Council, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Mellon Foundation. Right. You don't then try to figure out how you can get some subsidized grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. No. We gave this group the money. And the people who were picked to decide first how to do the money came from Black institutions, came from brown institutions, came from indigenous institutions, and they don't have any ties to any of these places that create what some people have called the professional managerial class. So you know what you're not going to be able to do? Engage in what Catherine Liu and others call virtue hoarding. Because see, the thing is, it's the usual suspects,
right?
And they have some exquisite Blacks who will excoriate you. They'll do the right poem, they'll have the beautiful art, and they get fellowships, and they come right. And then you set them up and you get out of their way. What comes out of that? I trust what comes out of that. But then they can't do that. Why? Because there's no value in that for us.
I'm about to say, Doc, there's no value in that. They can't gain and benefit. They can't control. Now, here's my final point, Doc, and I'm so grateful that you spent some time with us today. I mean, my point is that, like, at this point, the conversation about repairing the damage, we can put it as the term reparations, or we could just look at the term justice. At this point, how do we shift the conversation from just money talk to legacy building, to start to here's why I'm asking. I have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yes, sir.
By the time my son, God willing, gets to college in 10 years, and then 16 years for my daughter, if I don't want to have a conversation and be like, hey, son, yeah, we got reparations back in 20-something, but we spent it. So, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for your college.
How about that?
I don't, that doesn't, like, getting a check at this point doesn't seem like it will ease my soul.
Well, that's not going to happen. No.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to check. I need to have an investment in the futures of Black children and Black people. That's what I'm saying. When we talk about the stock and all of that, what is the futures of Black children and Black people in this country? Because that's the only investment. Like, I don't need a check. Like, I work and all of that. So I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the future of the children. So that way they don't have to carry this burden 15, 20 years from now. And my children come up to their dad, Dad, it's college is crazy, Dad. Like, it's very expensive. I thought y'all talked about that 10, 15 years ago. We did, son, but a lot of Black people just wanted to check.
How about that? Yeah, that's tough, Roger. I think, and Frankie writes about this in her book, Repair. Wealth transfer, first of all, public dollars are our dollars. We pay taxes. And so policy making in terms of how to spend public dollars, if Harvard wants to make a dent, and I'm not saying they won't, again, I'm saying this is an opportunity. Use Harvard's clout, use the number of Harvard graduates who are in public policy making at the state, federal, and local levels to engage in resource investment in these communities that are suffering. Use your cultural capital, the one you burnish so much, to intervene there. Now, when you're talking about self-repair, of course, we can't look outside for that. And so we're having a conversation in the Black Star Network in part because, you know, Brother Roland and all of us, you know, are saying, let us support our own. This becomes a threat to the hierarchy because while we're having this conversation, I'm sure this Harvard report is going to be discussed on white-facing media, and you're going to have some experts in there, and they're going to blah, 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 and it's going to be a very different conversation. Why? Because it's burnishing those places. I'm not against the check. I think everybody should get a check, but I also think that that can't be the objective, as you said. What we need to engage in terms of reparations transcends even the United States of America. If you're going to reimagine the country we live in and the world we live in, it's going to require a different look at the way we even think about each other. And I do not see that in the Harvard report, nor would I expect to see it in the Harvard report.
No.
Harvard's going to remain Harvard.
Right.
You see. And hey, be Harvard. But my question is, what's Tuskegee going to do? What's the legislature going to do in Louisiana for Southern and Grambling? What are we talking about with Alabama A&M and Alabama State? And more importantly, the K-12 schools. More importantly, everything from basic needs like food, shelter, housing, and that's policy making. You want to impress Harvard? Get some of them presidents and senators and some people to act right. Right. And go ahead and on the ground and give us the resources. I think that's the kind of thing we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Doc, I'm like, I want it all. Yeah, I want the money. I want land. I want educational equity. I want it all. Because now it's becoming more and more insulting and a slap in the face of us. Like, you got all these institutions that recognize that they have gained and benefited from slavery. Therefore, they've gained and benefited from our ignorance up to this present day.
Yes.
You can say that. You can, oh, yes. No, I want it all.
Yes.
I want, and there should be no compromise, because the United States government, these institutions, corporations, they have made us and conditioned us to believe that we were gaining something, and we're in some cases, some of the worse than we were 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Of course.
But so I want it all. I don't want no compromise. It's like, nah, bro, we can get a check.
Well, I mean,
let's get an acre of land for each family. You know what I'm saying? Let's make sure our children go to school for free. Like, I want it all.
Yes. Well, that's tough, Roger, because I think what that requires then is a facing that we're not going to get that by behaving the way we've been behaving. The only way we made progress in any moment in world history is when the people who are being taken advantage of say, that's it, you're not taking advantage of me anymore. So when you say that, of course, I think about the fact that again, Martin Luther King is evoked. Went to school at Boston University, had to come out of Morehouse and Crozier Theological Seminary, right there in the area. And Dr. King, of course, when he's critiquing militarism and materialism, when he is critiquing this whole structure that the society is based on, what you're talking about can be done, but it can't be done as long as we're asking. We have to turn away. One of the reasons Harvard almost has to write a report like this, and the other schools have to do it, is because people are increasingly turning away from those institutions. As well they should. So like, wait. Look. We understand. People like, I'm not, but damn about Harvard. You know, ask yourself this. Why was Nas a fellow at Harvard? Why did he receive the Du Bois medal? Why is there a hip hop archive at Harvard? Why? Because those young people from the Caribbean and from Black and brown communities in New York and everywhere else stood on their own ground, made their own culture without asking permission for anybody. It became so important that these places that want to be prestigious had to associate themselves with it. That's how you get reparations. You build your own. What Elijah Muhammad say? Accept your own and be yourself.
Your own, be yourself.
Watch how quick we get reparations when we decide we're gonna reserve our labor. We're not running up and down the football field for University of Alabama anymore. We're gonna go play at Tuskegee. Oh, we've got to investigate the yeah. It ain't gonna be enough yet. You understand?
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Black power.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, we got a lot to talk about because there are so many big conversations that are happening. This first conversation I want to have with you is about this idea of white nationalism. Now, some of us might believe that white nationalism is on the outskirts of our mainstream discourse, or whether it's about politics, social issues, economics, healthcare, whatever the case may be. We have been conditioned to believe that white nationalism is out there and we are over here. But I want to share with you folks, white nationalism is right here, here, here. It's all around us. The thing is, being able to differentiate and to make the judgment on what you're hearing as being nationalist, white supremacist language, and what you're hearing from someone that just might have their views. And this is one of the big things that we wanted to talk about today, because there is a growing number of people, not just random people, not just any old Joe or any old Jane, no. There's a growing number of people in power that are espousing white nationalist, white supremacist thoughts. And they're doing it on major platforms. Now, some of you might say, oh, President Donald Trump, he's one of the big ones. Yes, he is. But then there are others who may not, who unlike the president, are always in the mainstream. One of them being Tucker Carlson. Yeah. One of them being Sean Hannity. Yeah. And so many other people, including even those that work in our government. And so we wanted to talk about this growing trend, how white nationalism has become very, very mainstream in this day and time. I am joined by my brother. I'm always happy to have him. He gives us great insight. He is a diversity, inclusion, and equity specialist, and he's joining us for this conversation. One of our culture crew members, Brother Shanedu Wakwafor. Shanedu, thank you so much, brother, for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you for having me, Faraji. I'm glad to be here and happy belated.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about what is going on right now with this larger idea of white nationalism, because people don't think that it's actually so ingrained in our society and in our, lexicon, the national lexicon of policy, of social issues, of culture issues, all of those things. People tend to believe, oh man, it's not here. Especially, I live in an urban area. White nationals live in the rural woods, in the woods of West Virginia. Or they live in Pennsylvania. They're not coming to Chicago. They're not in Los Angeles. They're not in Detroit or Baltimore. No. But the thought, and the thing is, Shanedu, you know this and I know this, it's not KKK like we've seen in the early part of the 1900s. It's cloaked in a very, very different vernacular. And what we're seeing right now is something that I think is very, very fascinating. And here's the reason why we wanted to have this conversation. USA Today, they did this story about a Border Patrol agent who goes by the name of Brandon Judd. Now, Brandon Judd he's a Border Patrol agent, but he's also president of the National Border Patrol Council, which is a union representing more than 18,000 Border Patrol agents. He had a conversation on Fox News by an anchor named Bill Hemmer. And Keena, let's post what Mr. Judd had to say as he was wearing a polo shirt, and this shirt was showing that he was a part of the Border Patrol agency. I want to put his quote on the screen there, if we can, Keenan. All right, take a look. Let's go back to the other one, dear brother. The one that yep, there we go. All right, so This is what Mr. Judd said in his interview with Fox News. He said, quote, I believe talking about Democrats trying to change the demographics of the electorate. That's what I believe they're doing. They want to stay in power, and the only way to stay in power is continue to stay elected. Now, this quote that he is talking about is about the fact that they are opening, he believes that there are lax border enforcement. And so when allowing people to cross the border without any real restrictions, and he believes that it's a part of a larger conspiracy by the Democrats to allow immigrants to come to the border to fill up the United States so that way they can vote Democrat and essentially take over the election and keep Democrats in power. But he blames immigrants for this. He blames Biden for this. And this is something that we're seeing as part of a larger conversation around that white nationalism, white supremacists has been espousing. This is an idea that they blame other people. They blame black people. They blame brown folks. They blame people outside of white communities that says this is the problem. Now, he's blaming the president is being weak on these policies, but then he's saying that once they get in there, and this is something that you might hear from some folks, some white nationalists, you might hear them say, oh, they're coming across the border and they're bringing crime. They're dirty. They're infested. And they're ridding our cities of, they're plaguing our cities, this type of language. Sinead, what do we make of this when you have an individual like Brandon Judd, who is part of the federal agency, who is the president of an agency that has 18,000 Border Patrol agents under his command? Take a look at him, folks. And this whole idea, this is what they call replacement theory. And replacement theory is one of the main tenets of white supremacy, white nationalist thoughts. And he said this. This is not unusual because we also know that if outside of border patrols, you have police officers that have espoused certain these type of views in dealing with black people and dealing with diverse communities. What do you make of this, bro?
Well, you started by saying, even though you may not see the white supremacy in cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, you do, but you see them in policy. You don't see them in person. What I make of this statement by Mr. Judd is, it's just funny, especially when you realize that when it comes to white supremacy, a lot of those folks who espouse the idea of white supremacy are not even aware that the foreign people that they hate create a system that they benefit from. You brought up Donald Trump, our once presidents. I think Sonny Halston likes to say twice impeached and disgraced, because that's what he is. He was somebody who had an issue with China and this and immigration, but then you looked at the back of his ties and we saw where they were made. When you look at some of the things that are keeping our country going is because of the power of immigrants, whether it be in the state of Maryland, where we have a program where we allow some immigrants to come over the summertime to pick the crabs or get the crabs or get the seafood that we all end up enjoying during the ending analysis of it all. And that's the problem with white supremacy. They love the benefit of immigrants, but they don't like the immigrants themselves. And then when you think about border control, the word border, in my opinion, has always been an arbitrary term. Whoever's drawing the line says that this is the border and this is that and that and that. I just think, and I hate to say it, I just think that it goes back to what, rest her soul, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing said many, many years ago. Their race is getting smaller in number. Statistics has shown that. And I think this hysteria with the white race, thinking that it's the black people, the brown people coming to attack them. See, when you're guilty, you think the other folk are going to do to you what you tried to do to them, and that's never been the case. And it's this fear of annihilation. It's just been proven. It's the fear that their race, their time, not only in power, but their time on top is just coming to an end, which when you look at the statistical data that says that I think by 2040 or 2050, that white folks in this country will be a minority. They don't know what to do.
So we're in this unique position. You started off your remarks, Sinead, saying it's not on the outskirts, it's not on the fringe, it's right there, right? It's like cloaked in political rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you in that regard, because the dog whistles, the euphemisms that's often used, right? Whether we're talking about from Donald Trump, whether we're talking about from Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I mean, here's a woman that recently spoke at a white supremacist convention, give the whole speech, right? And then there are people are like, well, and she tries to defend, like, you know, I'm a representative, I'm working for Congress, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if you were a representative of the American people, why would you align yourself being on the agenda, you know, getting time to speak to that group, knowing that optics, the power of optics, right? Knowing that. So you did that because that's how you really believe. And two, you don't care about the power of optics. You're just like, hey, this is what I am. And you know the old saying that if somebody shows you who they are, and I think Dr. Maya Angelou said it, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And it's like we're still in a space of denial, Sinead, about believing that somebody can actually think like that. Whether you're talking about Trump or anybody, these are more of the vocal ones, right? But when you have a person like a Brandon Judd who is working behind the scenes, we don't know who the Border Patrol Union president is. But here's a guy that has the power to influence policy, as well as has a voice and a seat at the table to determine who gets across the border and who doesn't. He's a guy that has aligned himself with this. Now, he might be saying, well, no, I'm not a nationalist. This is what I believe. But it's hard for me to believe that somebody just happens to believe that immigrants are bad. They're dirty. They're the reason why the Democrats want them in, because they want to get power. It's hard for me to believe all of that just on your own. Mm-hmm. And then you go on to one of the most biased networks, such as Fox News, espouse these views, and it's not like challenged. It's not like, it's like, okay, great. You fall in line with it. I think there's a real concern that we should all have, that there are people in this government who claim one thing and then they do another. And I'm wondering, Sinead, if it's really about, I mean, there's no way in the world that you wouldn't know that's like a Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz or any of these people, right? That you didn't know what their views were. Mm-hmm. I didn't know. That's hard for me to believe, bro.
Mm-hmm. They all know. And we see this with every Trumper who got fired, who comes out with a book now and is pretending that he's a menace. But it wasn't a problem when he was being menacing and they were there and being complicit. They all know. And it's unfortunate that it's this game of pretentiousness. And it's also a game of, when you mentioned Donald Trump, I thought long and hard to ask myself, is he just a part of some quote unquote great conspiracy of white supremacy? No, it's a little bit more senile than that. It's actually very good for business for these folk. You say this, you get endorsements. You say this, you can. I mean, think about those people who stormed the Capitol, those white nationalists. I like the word supremacist better than nationalist. I feel like nationalist kind of is a softer tone. Yeah. You storm the Capitol and you do things that are illegal, that are against the law, but they knew that they had a huge backlog of donors that would save them, that would put money, people, hard everyday workers that are putting in money. And I think it's scary because even though the thought is fringe and the thought itself can be very rural, where you would think it's the middle America, those who are not, but it's being propagated by the high-end, very intelligent, very powerful, also white people.
Yeah.
And you never see a correlation between poor and rich in unison like you do when it comes to white supremacy. For some reason, that correlation of poor and rich no longer matters, where usually it's the poor saying eat the rich, but not when it comes to white supremacy. And I think when you think of this nation being a great nation, this nation and those who participate or benefit from white supremacy, they've never made any type of penance towards what they did or what they are doing. They've just created new ways. You know, you stop slavery, then here comes Jim Crow. You stop Jim Crow, here comes mass incarceration, and so on and so forth. Because folks don't want to make penance for the wrongs that they have ailed in, because in their minds, it's just my belief, it seems like maybe it makes them smaller of a person. They'll just continue to recreate the narrative that once existed from the moment that they stepped on this line. When you think about borders, Faraji, and the idea of borders, it's a foolish thing. When you look at the example of Haiti and Dominican Republic, it's the same country, it was. And then someone comes and draws a line, and all of a sudden, you are not you, and this is not that, and one is less than, and one is equal to, or what have you. It's absolutely preposterous. It's dangerous, and in this age of technology, it's way more widespread.
Let me just say this as we kind of wrap up this conversation, and I want to, you know, and we can't get everything all in the few minutes that we do have, but I wanted to bring this into the discussion, because I went to do a little research and say, okay, let me find some modern references to what we're seeing, because there's this growing trend. And folks, that's really one of the big reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, especially with my brother Shanadu, is because I wanted us to not think that this is some obscure or we're just totally oblivious to this. You and I have to be able to have the power of discernment to understand what's being said. We get so much information running across our minds, you know, that we're scrolling through, that we're taking in each and every day. And so language is so important. That's why we have to be very, very intentional about the language we use to describe the circumstances that we were either seeing or experiencing. But let me just share with you this piece that I read from an article from called "How White Supremacy Returned to the Mainstream Politics," and this is by an author by the name of Simon Clark. Keenan, let's post his quote on there very quickly. This is what Mr. Clark said. Check this out, folks. He said, "In such a changing landscape, old-fashioned racist and xenophobic appeals are unlikely to be politically successful beyond a small fringe. So the propagandists of racism have had to develop subtler approaches to stoking fear and hatred for political ends. To do so, they have repackaged racist traditions and language and forms that could more easily enter mainstream political discourse." Mr. Clark is a white man saying this, and I got this from the you can go and check this out. It's a fascinating article. It's from AmericanProgress.org, and this is based on a report that was done by American Progress to identify and calling out white nationalist ideas and that are infiltrating U.S. political discourse. Folks, look at that. Look at this. That we're in that time, and I'm wondering if those ideas become mainstream, the work that you're doing, diversity, equity, inclusion, how do you counter that force to make sure that there is some disruption of some of those ideas, or there is some debunking of some of those ideas? Because, you know, some of our people, we're so tipsy, we so ripped up, and we turned around, and up is down and down is up. We might be like, yeah, he right. It's the immigrants' fault. Yeah, he right. it's this group's fault or that group's fault. So how based upon the work that you're doing, how do you counter that type of propaganda?
Oh man, it's almost a sad response that I'm going to give you. There's almost an impossibility. It's almost an impossibility simply because when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you're doing it correctly, one of the main tenets in bringing in like a diverse workforce is dismantling white supremacy. It is at the top of everything, and that becomes difficult because sometimes if you're dismantling a house that you're living in, where do you then go? When this system is so intertwined to the everyday lifestyle that sometimes it's easier to pick through little pieces slowly but surely to hopefully one day get to the bigger overarching thing that, hey, we got to dismantle white supremacy. But it's very difficult. And actually, I go to trainings with other colleagues in the space, and that's the number one thing and that people ask, that how do we fix maybe this small thing here if it's emanating from a bigger thing of white men in particular and their beliefs, and how that in theory is the building block of all systems in this country. No one really has an answer, but that doesn't mean that we stop working. It has to be a continuous fight that even after you win, you even fight harder.
Well, we do need to have an answer. I'm serious. We do need to have an answer. There's no way. Here's why.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have an answer because they have a very concerted. They have a game plan on how to get this message out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they and I'm talking about white nationalists, white supremacists. They know that they can't go through the streets of urban centers of cities across this country, on a horse and dressed like the KKK. So how do they do it? They infiltrate systems. They infiltrate institutions, right? They get on television and they build up their following for their platforms for people to listen. Let me just share this with y'all, folks.
Mm-hmm.
New York Times, they did this expose on Tucker Carlson over these past couple of days. It's a 3-part series, and they call it White Nationalists. And in that 3-part series that they've done, they looked at over about 1,130 shows of Tucker Carlson, of 30 episodes of Tucker Carlson Tonight. And they looked at it, and they determined how many times he has stoked white fear, how many times he has blew the dog whistles and used the euphemisms and espoused those conspiracy theories. I mean, and it's so many times. But guess what? Tucker Carlson has the most profitable and one of the most popular shows on cable news. He's like the #1 guy on cable news, not just Fox. He's making Fox News so much money, and there are literally so many people that are tuned into him. You got to have a game plan to counter that. And so they have a megaphone in him. And so we have to have a megaphone for us, right? Mm. We have to make sure that the platforms that we use, we can't be silly and start to thinking like this is just going to be swept under the rug. This thing is like a wildfire, in my view, Sinedu. These ideas are like a wildfire. Not to say that all white people are going to subscribe to them. I don't believe that. But I do know that if you touch on somebody's dissatisfaction, which we are seeing with white America right now, mm-hmm. If you tap into their dissatisfaction, if you tap into their fear, then you may have a convert to that way of thinking. Mm. And that's the thing. We can't say, well, we'll try to figure it out. No, we better have a game plan. We better have a game plan because they're coming into Congress. They're coming into our state houses. They're making policy for us. They're in those positions that really impact our lives. And I'm not saying this out of fear. I'm saying this out of strategy. Mm. They're in these positions that impact every element of life. Mm. That's why we see what we see from Florida to Texas, the governors, the talking of the culture wars that we've been discussing. That's why these things are happening. And it's not, they are part of a larger school of thought. We got to have a game plan, bro.
You're right. And I think the thing about our community is that we're not we don't have a monolithic way of thinking. We don't have a homogenous way of thinking, if you will. We're just, our thoughts are so vast that it can't, the benefit in a lot of these white supremacists that no matter how different they are, their general theory matches up with each other. Whether you're a white supremacist from the South,
right,
the West or East, or even out of the country, because we heard what they said in Ukraine during the war of who can get on the buses first. We heard that. And we heard what they're saying in Hungary as they're starting to play Tucker Carlson at the CPAC that they have there and reverberate his rhetoric. I think what we must do, because at the same time, there is a benefit of this quote unquote white nationalist, white fear. It brings chances and opportunities for DEI to do their own infiltration. I'll give you an example. After the death of George Floyd, may he rest in peace, and Breonna Taylor, do you know what a lot of corporations did? They built a DEI team. Never had it before. They built one, and a lot of them are being ran by Black people who are creating strategies all throughout our society that involve Black and brown people penetrating these same areas.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that happens then is like, okay, now we've penetrated Congress, we've penetrated the private companies, the public companies. Now that we're there, now that we have power, this has become our biggest issue since the days of Martin Luther King. Who becomes the rallying call? Who gets to give the word, the marching orders? Will people want to take a more Martin-esque approach or a more Malcolm-esque approach? And that's where it becomes difficult, because the trail, if you will, or the journey to Black folk saving ourselves or staying alive or staying connected, it comes from a vast array of folk who believe that it shouldn't just be an A or B approach. It should be an A through Z. It should be different ideas and different ideals. And that's where it becomes really complicated, because when so many people are saying so many different things, it's so many different factions running around themselves. And I think that is where we are.
And look, as we're having this conversation, it just goes to show you how on time we are with even having this conversation. Folks, breaking news out of CNN, where Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, it was decided upon by a state judge down in Georgia. Folks in Georgia, y'all got to listen up on this. Judge Charles Boudreaux, he said in a 19-page recommendation that Marjorie Taylor Greene should not be taken off the ballot because, or shouldn't be disqualified over her role in the January 6th insurrection. This is what the judge, now look at his reasoning. In his 19-page recommendation, he said, quote, the challengers have produced insufficient evidence to show that Representative Greene engaged in that insurrection after she took the oath of office on January 3rd, 2021. The recommendation will now be taken up by the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. This is a Republican. This is the same guy who Donald Trump said you should try to find the votes for me down in Georgia. Y'all remember that? It's, and according to CNN, it's possible but highly unlikely that Raffensperger will overrule the judge's recommendation and disqualify Greene on her own. Look at this. Look at this real quick, folks. There were groups, advocacy groups, legal analysts, scholars, folks, and community leaders that said she needs to be off the ballot. She's just doing too much. And this judge says she will not be disqualified. She shouldn't be disqualified because she was not engaged. She may not have been engaged, but did she create the winds by which January 6th could take place? Y'all remember, I wish we had enough time right now, but there was a picture of Josh Hawley, and And Josh Hawley was there. It was a picture as he was walking out. All this mayhem is happening from January 6th. He walking out with his fist in the air. Y'all remember this? I don't know if some of you may have seen this, but he walking out with his fist in the air like he's in solidarity. This is what's happening. White nationalism becoming. Now look, again, he said insufficient evidence. But if you look at the record of Marjorie Taylor Greene, how is it insufficient? Everything she's a believer in some of these conspiracy theories, like the replacement theory. She believed that the election was stolen. All of these things. But she should not be disqualified from the ballot. And this might be, I'm going to say it, this might be one of the ways that they keep Trump on the ballot for 2024. Absolutely. That there's not sufficient evidence. Or because he wasn't, quote unquote, engaged, because there's still a lot of mystery about whether he was engaged in January 6th or not, that he may not be relieved from the ballot. This is the stuff I'm talking about, folks. So I'm saying that because this is the place we're in America, and we have to be very intentional and cognizant, and most importantly, we got to be willing to fight to figure out how we're going to move forward in this country, because these forces are coming at us. If they're judges, if they're council people, if they're state representatives, and if they're presidents, then we got to have a game plan.
Faraji, it's interesting that when you were reading that and explaining what has happened, that connection, that continuation, the only thing I could think about was how when Barack Obama was running, how they made it a huge deal that he had any connections with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and Jeremiah Wright.
Right.
Where he had to repudiate these two human beings as if they were the bane of existence in this world. And how these two gentlemen have never did a national insurrection, has never led people to say hang the president or nothing of that nature, but just the idea that Barack Obama could be associated in any way with two Black influential leaders could have caused him his presidency. It just shows that at the very end of the day, this white nationalism thing is so powerful that even the white folk, quote unquote, who may seem like they want to help, at the very end of the day, their plan is not Democratic or Republican. It's white, irregardless of anything else. And it's very dangerous. And you're right, Faraji, that is exactly how they would put Trump on. And once it works, this is the thing that we're noticing. Once it works, everybody else does it. You saw it in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill. Once they got that, all the other states that align, and that, like you said, it's a strategy. It really is a strategy. And people don't like hearing this as a solution, but that is why we have to vote. And then after we vote, you hold those people who are elected to represent you the same way you hold your kid that you send to an HBCU to represent your family and represent the culture. You got to do it, because that's the way this game that they're playing, that they wrote back when we were 3/5 of a person, that's how you win this game.
Yeah. I'm just looking at some folks, and very quickly as we go to a break, Taylor checked in and said, we don't know what was presented to the judge. We are all watching this mess. A judge has to go by his paperwork. So that goes back to the legal complaint being insufficient. Janelle checked in and said, just because hate is winning in the marketplace, there are things on which we can stand together. The race class narrative is the winning narrative, and solidarity will win. B Dizzle checked in and said, Georgians are going to have to turn out like never before and defeat her in November. Facts. And I know that Stacey Abrams is running for governor down there. Brother King Lee said, if the U.S. Department of Justice have any criminal evidence against Trump, MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or any of those racist politicians, then they need to bring it forward now. Now. I'm in agreement with that, like right now. If they are weak, if this administration that is composed of a moderate politician, a black woman. You got all these black folks and Latinos and other. If this administration doesn't, and I said this before, if y'all don't handle this, take on the cancer of white nationalism and white supremacy, voting is not going to destroy democracy. None of that other stuff. That white nationalism is the greatest threat to democracy in this country right now. White supremacy, those ideas, those conspiracy theories, all of those things. That is the great threat facing this country right now. Folks, the streaming giant Netflix seems to be struggling right now. Earlier, a few weeks ago, it had posted that its revenue was declining, and that a number of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, had already left the streaming site. 200,000 had already left, and some fear and worry that by the mid part of this year, millions of subscribers will leave for good. Now that puts the streaming giant in a very, very precarious position, hoping that they can save their platform. Netflix is also facing licensing issues with some of their hit shows, including Friends, Paw Patrol, and other shows along with that. Now, that is happening. And then on the inside of Netflix, it was just reported, folks, that Netflix has slashed or cut a number of high-profile culture and entertainment journalists from its staff, mostly women of color, Black women, Latino women, and Asian women. The disappointment comes in the fact that there has already been a number of issues that Netflix faced in terms of diversifying its workforce. And now with this recent cuts of jobs from its To-Doom website, which takes fans behind the screen, many are asking the question, is this going to be the end of the streaming giant as we know it? Here to talk a little bit about this is my culture crew. We got Jules P., who is a hip-hop artist and activist. And we also have a filmmaker, a director, and a writer herself, Miss B. Fly, who is the co-founder of Blackwater, a production house, and is the founder of Black Jesus Productions. I wanted to talk to you about this, B. I'm gonna bring you in too, Jules. Don't get upset. I'm gonna bring you in. But I wanted to get B's view on this because, you know, I had an opportunity, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I had the opportunity to host your film, Amethyst Love Gods, over the weekend. And one of the things that you mentioned when talking to your audience is that you're in a very different space right now in terms of putting out content, Black content in particular, and that you weren't looking for a major distribution company, or you weren't looking for these streaming giants to try to pitch your film and other projects that you do. You weren't looking for that you understand that it was all about direct connection to the consumer. And now we're seeing this situation with Netflix. What do you make of this? Is this the end of streaming? Do you feel like people have gotten over it? I mean, what is this a sign of for you?
No, actually, I think the exact opposite. So many people are so into streaming. It has created a more competitive landscape for the Netflix. And once upon a time, Netflix kind of operated as this way as this renegade website to where you were able to stream independent content that you couldn't see on cable. And so now that is literally the exact opposite of what Netflix has become, So this is what we experience in the world of capitalism, supply and demand. We have a lot more streaming services in order to view our content. Excuse me, I've talked for an entire week, And so this really is sign of the time and sign of a very good job that we are doing when it comes to bringing more content to more people directly without needing to go towards one outlet for distribution. And so now Netflix is suffering because there are so many outlets that we're able to stream our content on. And so unfortunately, they are still making some very wrong decisions at their table. And unfortunately, the fewer women you have at your table, the fewer women of color you have at your table, the more wrong decisions you will most likely continue to make in this future. And so are we looking at the end? We might not be. We might be looking at literally Netflix setting up a PR bankruptcy. You understand? You know what I'm saying? And so Netflix will continue. Should they? Something needs to happen because the content is starting to get watered down on a lot of different levels. I'm a Netflix subscriber. My family is a Netflix subscriber, right. But when it and so we subscribe to a plethora of streaming services, you know. But as a filmmaker, I am rooting on the inside for us to be able to occupy our own digital real estate. And so, and right now, as long as Netflixes are propagating themselves as if they're the only place to distribute work, then we have a problem. And because that right there is a lie, you know? And so it's like, we have to be able to pull this veil back and understand at the end of the day, we all have power in our .com. We have that power, and we don't have to give all of our power away to the top 5 streaming services. Once upon a time, they did not exist.
Right.
You know?
It's only been a decade.
It's only been a decade.
It's only been a decade, B.
Right. And so at the end of the day, I'm tired of making, you know what I'm saying, of making more white men rich. I'm tired of, you know, like catching the tears of white men. Like, oh my God, we're losing our profit. Let's fire Black women. Listen.
So let me ask you this question before I get to my man Jules. Should they be saved?
What is there to be saved? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't believe they're losing. I don't believe they're about to close shop. I don't believe they're about to dismantle their service and we're about to sign on tomorrow and say Netflix is gone. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there is like, how do you it's not sick. Yeah, like, well, it's not sick.
The only way I'm saying being saved, and I hear you, and the only way I'm saying being saved, Jules, is the fact that Netflix is like an industry leader, right, in terms of streaming. I mean, there's a whole cultural term that we use, Netflix and chill. Nobody says Hulu and chill. Nobody, you know what I'm saying? Nobody,
Comcast and chill.
Nobody be like, yo, I'm trying to Amazon and chill. Like, this doesn't work that way. Everybody knows Netflix and chill. So it's such a major powerhouse in terms of streaming and in terms of providing content, even though, you know, Jules, their content had improved, you know what I mean? Of course, they have, you know, big shows, Bridgerton, Squid Games, you know, some of their bigger shows, Bird Box and all of those things. But now, and then you see a flock of A-list celebrities who are doing Netflix movies, right? We've seen that. But then you, on the other side of all of that growth and that talk of success and that talk of they're going to be around, you do have some things. It's like a smoke and mirrors. It's like some things are falling apart behind the scenes. I mean, if you don't, and I'm with B, if you don't have Black women, if you don't have no women at the table, please.
Your
you do,
failing.
buddy.
You're going down.
You're going down. And the woman is the last person you want to cut first.
That's not,
you know what I'm saying? In the situation
first. You
I
open
mean,
the
because
door first.
Say it again.
Like, so you open the door first. You don't
right.
fire us first. Like, that's no.
Right. I mean, that's the last thing, because women bring, unlike men, Jules, and I don't know if I shared this with you. I remember when I was doing my radio show at Morgan, and I looked at my ratings, women were my #1 listeners. Women, Black women. And so that led to me, it's like when you start to look at the data behind these shows and you find that you have Black women or you have Latino women or you just have all these different women that are tuning in, that is going to determine the agenda and the direction of that show. After a while, I started, hey, man, we got to get more women on these shows. We got to get more women voices because women are tuning in. And we found that women are more loyal than men are. So talk to me, Jules. What's your take on it, bro?
So I got a couple of different perspectives and points. So I'm gonna start inside out. So let's start with the inside first. So discussing the women that are now being basically released from Netflix. One, I know personally, I don't know about 95. I don't watch TV, nothing like that anyway. I work, I do a lot of stuff in the real life world of existence. So I don't really know about what's going on television or streaming services. But you know who does know? Women know. And that's how I find out. They tell me the shows to watch. They tell me, oh, watch this. This is what I'm watching. I don't really hear dudes telling me about that. You know, I'm a sports kid. When I'm watching TV, it's only sports. I don't watch nothing else but sports. Right. Everybody in my camp knows this. You see, all I do is watch sports. That's my niche. That's what I do. Sports. But when it comes to actually getting hooked to a show, start watching content, it's from a woman. So from hearing that you're releasing, you're targeting the women of color from, and I heard that there was that was formed in it's recently new. It was formed in December.
It was formed in 2021.
Yeah, so it's not even a year.
It's not even 6 months old.
Yeah. It's so that's problem number one. Like without that to me, a woman is a foundation. A Black woman is definitely a foundation. I mean, again, raised by a Black woman, I was, so I understand where foundation comes from. So when you have the ideals and insights they have to add on to what they're, trying to bring to the company and merge on to get the viewership up or try to get the content diversified, that's not the group that you want to cut. Okay, Now let's back out from the inside and let's go to outside. I remember a lesson. I know we're going to talk about Teacher Appreciation Week later on, but I remember a lesson I was taught, I want to say maybe in high school in economics. And it's a simple phrase: when companies compete, consumers win. So when Netflix came out, that was the only streaming service. That was the end all be all. That's what you knew to go to. Now you have your HBO Maxes, you have your Stars apps, you have Hulu, you have Tubi, you have YouTube TV, and the content now, they're getting licenses before they even come out, whereas Netflix is still trying to get licenses from different shows that they're trying to put on their platforms. I remember just the Dave Chappelle twice. One with when they put Chappelle show on without his permission and he wasn't getting down from it. And then two, when he dropped his special and then had that whole back and forth with the company. It's like you're kind of sort of now you set the precedent. So Netflix gets you were the trailblazer. You get that credit. That's what you are. But the problem is now you have these other streaming services who are pushing out more content, more relevant content. I mean, what did we just talk about last week? The new show on HBO Max. What's the Baltimore show that just?
We Own the City.
We Own the City. It's on HBO Max. It's not on Netflix. Right. So I'm going to HBO Max. Once I subscribe there, like everything. Then you start saying, okay, well, HBO, I knew growing up, HBO from when I had Comcast, that's the channel I went to watch movies. So if I want to see more relevant movies, more up-to-date movies, I can go straight to HBO now, especially during the pandemic. They were sending movies straight to HBO Max. They weren't sending them to Netflix. So I didn't need money.
Right. That's true.
So you're losing your subscribers already on the basis that you don't have the content that is coming out currently. So you're trying to create shows or get content creators to utilize your streaming services to put them on there. But the problem is the deal that you're offering them is not good enough. Also remember, was about 5 years ago, the whole Monique issue that she had with Netflix. And basically what they were telling her that she wasn't that big of a star for what she was asking for financially for her work. And it's just like, so you've been on the front line of the news stations for all of the time. So it's like, all right, now you're about to get lapped. I don't feel like it's going to, like I agree with B. It's not going to burn, but it's going to get lapped.
Jules, did you just say you're about to get lapped?
About to get lapped, baby. I mean, you got to think. And I say, even with like YouTube TV, I used to have YouTube TV. It's like I would go there because the shows that I watch, and then the partnership they already have with the licenses of YouTube, because it's called YouTube TV, all my content is already there. And they're getting no current movies. So it's like it's just you're now losing the race now. Like I said, you're about to get left because you're losing the race of what you're able to provide content wise. And then internally, all the problems that we've been hearing over the last 24 months, we'll just say 2 years, the last 2 years of all internal problems that you're having between financial arrangements for licensing that you're trying to get, financial arrangements for the stars that are shows that you're putting on your platforms, the news that you just had came out with the Tadum, I don't know if to call them committee, but the women that you're now basically releasing after you just started this in December. It's like you're like I always say, no PR is bad PR, and as long as your name is at the forefront, you're still getting hits. But at the same sense, we're also paying for a subscription that's rising. It looks like $1.50 every day on 3 months. And then you're trying to find ways to say, oh, well, now we're going to find why you're sharing passwords. We're going to stop that. Like, you're doing too much.
Too much.
I've been, listen, you want to know a secret? Since we're on Black Star Network, I don't even watch my Netflix. I got 4 people watching my Netflix. I just pay for it. I don't care. And they're not going to do nothing about it. I don't care. I don't care. Like, can't do nothing about it. I don't even watch my Netflix. I got 4 other people watch my Netflix. I don't care. So that's 4 subscriptions you're losing right now. Because if I cancel, then what?
Yeah. Straight up. That's for real, you know. And so definitely, like they're doing a lot right now. Like just a year ago, they hired droves of women of color and then announce it. And so now, between then and now, it's like they have bullied their subscribers into third-party verifications and all sorts of things.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They're limiting the devices that we're able to watch the content from. And so now they're complaining about the results of what happens when that happens. Like it's amazing. And so now they're canning Black women. Like, listen.
Well, I mean, but I think, and you know what? I forgot that Monique had that issue with Netflix a couple of years ago. Now that comes back, and it comes back to bite them in the ass, because you're like, bro, what was y'all thinking? You know what I mean? Like y'all were doing, because at that time, remember, Netflix was the giant. It was like, boom, like, oh snap, she couldn't get this deal with Netflix, therefore, man, she mustn't. Woo. Right. But they wind up paying, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, B and Jules. I think they wind up doing a show with either Wanda, what's the sister's name?
Wanda Sykes.
Wanda Sykes. Mm-hmm. I think they wind up doing like a certain little special with Wanda Sykes, even though she wasn't completely, satisfied with the deal, but it was a little deal. But I think they wound up moving forward with her. So
they did.
Yeah. So it's like when you start to like Monday morning quarterback, Jules, you know what I mean? You look back and you're like, wait a minute, y'all were like making some poor decisions from the beginning almost. You know what I'm saying? And if you look at Netflix now, a lot of their most popular shows are shows that have been imported from other countries. Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? From everything from Korea to Italy to Spain. I mean, they've been imported. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of subtitle content on Netflix. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? At
the end of the day, we are tired of the we're tired of the way the colonizers are spoon feeding stories to us. Like we're tired of the damsel in distress white girl. Like we're tired of the American rom-com. We're tired of Jennifer Aniston. Like we're tired of the we're tired.
What has been 20 years since you've been on Friends?
Like we're tired, right. And so it's like the people want more, you know what I'm saying? The people want more. And so it's like, and we're able to get that and now experience that through content from all over the world. Yeah. So yeah, Netflix has to step their game up. And in order to even interpret what that means, they have to literally disassociate with the dinosaur of distribution. Mm-hmm. Like it is a dinosaur. Like that dinosaur is literally ancient and it's archaic and it is a relic and it is frozen in time. And the people are literally breathing life into another system all the time. You know, like we'll let you know really what's going on.
And here's what I think the other part of it being, and Jules, they got so excited because of their pandemic numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, their streaming numbers. Everybody was in the house. Now people are back out in the streets. It's like you got to do more. You got to do more to keep people in front of their screens. Personally, I don't. You know, it's a gamble because some people will tune into it and then others won't. You know, it depends on the movies.
Right.
It depends on the movie.
Do you remember when what was that, Luke Cage? Do you remember when Luke Cage shut down the internet because we were all watching Luke Cage? The entire world
show, man.
Was watching Luke Cage at the same time. The weekend it was released, and it crashed. It crashed the system. Like Netflix system isn't even set up to do what it fantasizes about. So it's like the moment we all jump on to watch the shit, we kill the server anyway. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we need more Netflixes so Netflix bandwidth can stabilize.
So I guess so. Y'all wild today. But so at this point, do we need to keep streaming services? Because can I be real with you? Like Jules, you were ultra real with us. You gave us TMI in some cases. But let me just tell you, I used to have a service where it provides, like, you know, it's not cable, but it's like you get cable, some cable stations, but you get local stations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like now everything is a la carte.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is streaming. So you know what I mean? Like for me, it's like we got probably like 6 or 7 different streaming subscriptions, right, to make up our viewing content. And guess what? The funny part is that we got these streaming services, and then we go back to just one. Like we lay in bed, we turn on 1 or 2 streaming services. We don't even take the other ones. We just do 1 or 2.
Right.
So I mean, I'm wondering, like, if they quote unquote, if they put regular TV, because that's hard to find, regular TV, like your basic channels, like that's integrated into the cable package, or you got to get the subscription for that particular station or that particular channel. And I'm thinking to myself, this is probably doing more harm than good to the consumer. What do you think?
You know, regular, when we think about regular TV, all right, there's nothing regular about regular TV, all right?
Maybe I'm thinking from back in the 90s where you had like 3 or 4 stations.
No, listen, we're talking about what? ABC, we're talking about NBC, CBS, Fox.
Right. And
right.
Fox.
There's one more that I can't, but these are your tops. These are your networks. These are also the most expensive to advertise on, and these are the most paying. Okay, so if you're working on one of these shows on the daytime or nighttime, you are being paid the most. If you are advertising daytime or nighttime on this network, you are also paying the most. All right, there's nothing regular. Like internet, once upon a time, internet was trying to, and independent content makers were mimicking TV when it came to the way we even create our run times, right? And even the way we break down our treatments, break down our scenes, the way we rise and we fall, all of that was kind of given to us in a treatment by regular TV, okay? But today, regular TV is trying to be the internet.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Regular TV is literally has very few regular scripted programs. Regular TV is now designed for the regular person.
Mm-hmm.
The regular person can be seen on regular TV, and that through its game shows, through its reality shows. And this right here is what I believe is the new frontier.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're tired of the celebrity. I think we're tired of celebrity, and we are looking at other more regular, accessible lifestyles in order to spectate in order to purvey. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? Like
that's
we're
true.
looking at different types of content in order to understand new cultures. Like we are tired of the white man told story. We see through it today. We assume that it's going to be a lie. You know what I'm saying? We assume that it's going to be historically inaccurate. You know what I'm saying? We assume someone's going to get shot on set. You know what I'm saying? Like it's over. It's over. You know what I'm saying? It's over. It's done. You know what I'm saying? By 2030, like we will have more of our celebrities occupying their own .coms. Like I need 50 to be gangster enough to put his money behind his .com and the work that he's executive producing by these Black women. I need him to actually do that and disconnect. So instead of beefing on the gram and on Twitter with stars and his contracts all fucked up to where I can't finish the season when I want to finish the season, he needs to go onto his own .com and really do that because he can. Because
and you know what, AB, really quickly, we got like 30 seconds. In his situation, it goes to show you how much power you have and don't have. You see what I'm saying? Like he didn't establish the .com. He didn't establish an alternative platform, an avenue to see his stuff. You know what I'm saying? So you got to beef with this major, you know, production house. You gotta go on a war of words with that. And it really shows that you don't have as much power. Yes, you can take away the content. But let me just tell you, if 50 takes away that content, Stars is going to be like, okay, it take a little hit. But you know how many other writers there are that want to get their content on that platform? You see what I'm saying? Like there's all
no, but
it's like
there's of course they're going to stay
that's what
in
I'm
business.
saying. But you gotta have it. All I'm saying is
to
to your point. But all I'm saying to your point, B, is what you've been saying, which is having the vision to establish a separate platform. That way, when a situation like this comes up, you could just tell people, hey, look, I'm not dealing, we're not in business with Stars anymore. Come to, you know, 50cent.com.
Right. And watch the whole thing.
And you know what? We're going to produce it. Matter of fact, I'm looking for new writers. I'm looking for this. And you start building that part of the platform. But I think that's when I looked at that 50 Cent situation, and even looking at this situation with Netflix, and really quickly, a lot of these women that were working for Netflix were very high profile journalists. They worked for various magazines like Vogue and other, you know, publications. And they're on Instagram and Twitter begging for jobs. Now you are a major, well-established writer, and you're literally begging for jobs. And that's the sad part about it, that you did not have the foresight, the vision to get prepared for a moment like this. As we're going to jump into one of the big discussions around reparations. And this is coming out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there was a recent order about the Tulsa massacre, survivors and the victims of that massacre, and really what should be done. How should that situation be made accountable for those who are responsible? Now, this is the big question that has been looming over court cases for the past few years, not just the past 1 or 2. I'm talking about at least 20 years, folks, where the question has been asked, well, what about justice? What does justice look like in the case of the Tulsa massacre? And so today we wanted to have a conversation about this because it was just announced earlier this week that Judge Caroline Wall said that the motion to dismiss this conversation, or to dismiss this motion where defendants sought a motion to dismiss the case where plaintiffs are seeking reparations, Judge Caroline Wells said that was granted in part and denied in part, which essentially means that the case can proceed and move forward as they are seeking justice for the victims and survivors of the Tulsa massacre. Now, one of the lawyers and the attorneys of the case, Mr. Solomon, let me make sure I'm getting his name correctly, Demario Solomon Simmons. He is a plaintiff. He's an attorney for the plaintiff in the case. And one of the things that he said is that there are only literally a handful of survivors left from the Tulsa massacre. And Keenan, let's put this quote on the screen. One of the things he said was this: when you work on something for 20 plus years, folks, check this out. You have defeat after defeat. You have client after client die. To know I have 3 living survivors that are here with me right now feel this partial victory, it means everything. Now, Mr. Solomon Simmons has been saying that he's been working with these clients, 3 of these clients that he has over the age of 100 years old. They have yet to receive any real justice, nor have they gotten any real evidence that something was going to be done about the Tulsa massacre. And it looks like this week, after all of this time, folks, this week, the judge says the case can move forward as they're fighting for reparations. Now, what does that mean? What does that look like? We are going to be joined in a few moments by Dr. Ray Winbush, but we wanted to bring New Culture crew member Kia Gladden into this conversation first to get her take on it, and then we bring in Dr. Winbush very quickly. But Kia, thank you again for checking in. You are an educator. You are a researcher. What does this mean for you? What do you take from this recent judgment from Judge Carolyn Wells?
So there's a lot of things that I have. One of my biggest things that actually scares me about this is, without even trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I'm trying to figure out why it is that they've been starting this case for a number of years, but particularly back in 2000, in the year 2000, right? And now we have only 3 survivors left, right? So at this point, what they are attempting to do is, it seems like, sort of waiting them out, because we have 2 that are 107, 1 that is 108. So that story is about to be not told anymore. And we already know about, when it comes to Tulsa, even in Tulsa, it's been a secret that no one told anyone about. So I'm just trying to figure out why all of a sudden, is it trying to say in history, oh no, we were going to do something about this? Or is it saying, let's make it seem like we were going to do something about this, and, we no longer have any survivors to actually tell that story.
Yeah, and I think that's the race against the clock that the attorney for the plaintiffs have been talking about, which is why dealing with, right? One of the survivors, and I want to make sure I got her name correctly as well. She's about to turn 108 years old, and so her attorney said, hey, can we make a decision quickly, because her birthday is coming up on May the 10th, and we want to make sure that she can be around for this. This would be a great birthday gift for her.
It would be
it's
really,
going to be
really
very interesting. I want to bring in Dr. Ray Winbush, who is an author. He is a scholar. He's a researcher and a professor, and he's director of the Urban Institute at Morgan State University. Dr. Winbush, always a great pleasure to have you as part of these conversations. How are you this afternoon?
Good to see you.
Good. Dr. Winbush, you've been dealing with and working on the issue of reparations for at least 30 years. But one of the things that we're seeing from this Tulsa massacre, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Doc, I have not heard Tulsa being brought into the conversation of reparations. I did not know that was a goal for this unfortunate, tragic part of our history. I did not know that they were asking for reparations. I know that they was asking for justice, but I didn't know specifically they were asking for reparations. How did that happen?
Well, it happened, as you said earlier, the Tulsa reparations case has been going on for at least 20 years. People forget that Johnny Cochran the late Johnny Cochran was one of the lawyers for the plaintiffs in the case, as well as Charles Ogletree, who teaches at Harvard. And, you know, Brother Ogletree, we call him Tree. He's now suffering from Alzheimer's. So this is a case that is long overdue. I remember when Sister Viola Fletcher was in her late 80s, and people were saying, you know, we've got to do this quickly. And now, as you say, next week she turns 108. Leslie Randall, she's 107, and Hughes Van Ellis is 101. And so we've always looked at the Tulsa case as being a critical case. I first learned about it, and it's important to note this, that John Hope Franklin was my professor at University of Chicago a long time ago, millions of years ago, when I was working on my degree. And his father, Buck Franklin, was the attorney for the victims of the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre in 1921. They would not let them sue then. And the judge 20 years ago told them, well, we don't think that the effects of the 21 riot are still being felt, which is a lie, of course. So that Judge Wall moved this forward is a major victory.
So there was a part of this, Dr. Winbush, that I thought that was interesting, which was the not the attorney for the plaintiffs, but I guess the prosecutor. And I want to make sure that we bring up the fact that this prosecutor, John Tucker, he's representing the Tulsa chamber. And basically he was trying to make the case that what happened 100 years ago, it really, and they call it, they looked at the I guess the charge as public nuisance. So before I get to his case, I want to get your understanding of this and help us to understand.
Well,
they're saying that public nuisance in what regard?
Well, see, we've tried every angle on this, just every angle on this. The idea that Brother DeMario, the lawyer for the plaintiffs now, is saying is that it was a nuisance. And this, you got to understand, the word nuisance is a broad legal term. Yeah, what happened in 1921 damaged the community. It was a nuisance to the community. I mean, that's an understatement.
Right.
It was a massacre, but under the law, it's the last thing that you can actually do in this case. That's why this case was so important. And I think the sister said earlier, and it's very true, and it's not a conspiracy theory. They are trying to wait out till all of the victims of the massacre have died. I remember when testimony before the House back in like 2005 or 2006, there were something like 20 survivors of the massacre. Now we're down to 3.
Yes.
And what's really interesting, I'll say this and I'll shut up. J.T. Tucker, the mayor of Tulsa, he was so, excited about building the park, apologizing and everything. But he is one of the persons opposed to reparations, including also including the guy that you just mentioned, the head of the Chamber of Commerce. There's 7 defendants in this case, and both the mayor as well as the head of the Chamber of Commerce are one of them.
So Mr. Tucker said that that the massacre happened too long ago to warrant a charge of public nuisance, and that the courts need to really look at and evaluate how much of the law behind public nuisance would extend to cover a circumstance like this. So how do you think that would play out in the next step of this whole process, Doc?
Well, I think they're going to be able to prove this. We really have confidence in this lawsuit. If you can imagine for a moment, there was a major uprising in Atlanta, Georgia in 1906. In fact, W.B. Du Bois was living there at that time. Now we see Atlanta, what do they call it? The Black Mecca film studios there, black middle class, solidly black mayors, so forth. That would have been Tulsa had not the massacre occurred. Instead of us saying we're all going to go to Atlanta to live, we would have all been saying we're going to go to Tulsa to live.
Fact.
And so, you know, the mayor doesn't have a leg to stand on. It's amazing that when it comes to white history, we want to remember it and still see it as important. So most recently, we celebrate the impact of 9/11 right now. We always talk about remember the Alamo. We have Memorial Day. What happens on the 4th of July? But when it comes to black suffering, we want to say, well, that's over with. Yeah, slavery was bad. What happened in Tulsa was bad, but that's over with. That happened 100 years ago. So when it comes to black suffering, we want to get through with it quickly.
Yeah, very, very much, very much. And Nakia, when we talking about that level of black suffering, I mean, it was brought up during this recent court trial that this massacre was likened to an oil spill.
Yes.
That you won't, like, just like any, and I remember when they had the Valdez oil spill years ago and all of those oil spills, like, you really can't wrap your head or your mind around how much of an impact that had on the environment. And that's the same way that folks presented what happened 100 years ago to the courts, that there are generations with an S that have been affected by this massacre that happened on May 31st through June the 1st. So do you think that's a strong defense?
Absolutely not. I mean, to compare, well, I wouldn't consider it like a natural disaster. Obviously, an oil spill is not necessarily a natural disaster, but in terms of comparing human on human, that's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
To compare those two, and it's actually offensive. And it's offensive to the descendants of those who did suffer through that. I got to listen to the story earlier today of the 3 survivors, and to hear their story and to see that she said, I think about this every day. You know, they saw bloodshed. And for what reason? So we can go back to the reason of how this whole entire thing happened, because, you know, a young black man went into an elevator, and it was a white young woman, and she was operating the elevator, and then she screamed, and then all of a sudden it was just bloodshed. So we can go back to the history of that. But the idea to equate those two is utterly ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to reparations, and I read a quote earlier today where it says that reparations, if we were to replace the word, because it's much like welfare, because it's really easy to make it seem like, you know, welfare is bad because for some reason, quote unquote, it's associated with Black people, but then also with reparations. But it said reparations is to replace the wealth that racism stole. So reparations is not a bad thing. It just has a bad connotation when you use that word. I don't know how to rephrase it, because our government, I'll say that, has allowed it to become a negative connotation, much like they did with welfare.
Well, I think part of that, the reason that, you know, that becomes such a touchy subject, Nakia, is the fact that people don't want this country. Like this country, we have a terrible, terrible history of taking ownership of the stuff that we've done bad to people, on how we made violations. Like reparations to a lot of people is another word for justice. And really, who wants to be held accountable for some violations that they know that they're wrong for? I mean, this is, you know, and I saw this, Dr. Winbush, that when we have this conversation about Tulsa, when we have this conversation about the, you know, transatlantic slave trade, it comes down to the fact that America does not want to face the reality that it was the source of pain, hurt, generational division, familial division. I mean, America just doesn't want to come forward and say, you know what, we did that. We did this.
You're exactly correct. And it's amazing how the system of white supremacy can weaponize words. So right now we see the word woke. You know, I remember just 7-8 years ago, that was a positive term, but now it's a negative term. Affirmative action. You know, I'm thinking of reparations. These are words that were positive, but the system of white supremacy can make us start thinking negatively about it. That's why people within the struggle, we have used terms like compensatory justice or historical compensatory justice. But the bottom line is to repair the damage done by a system of white supremacy. And what would Tulsa have been had it not had this massacre? It would have been like Atlanta is today.
Yes, absolutely right. Taylor, I'm sorry, Janelle first said, Faraji, oil spills are considered accidents. The Tulsa massacre was a deliberate onslaught of evil.
Absolutely.
Facts.
Right.
I mean,
and here's the thing that's really, really crazy about that whole situation is that they had airplanes and dropping bombs. That doesn't sound like
that's not an accident.
It didn't sound like an accident at all. Period.
It is the biggest terrorist act that was ever committed on American soil. People talk about the bombing of Timothy McVeigh, 20 years ago. This was the single biggest terrorist act ever perpetrated against Americans by Americans in this country.
Wow. And I think people need to hear it just as that, Doc. Taylor said, I hope at the age of the defendants that there are not others in the wings waiting to take control of anything they may get. Concern for seniors is real. How do we, and I think that Taylor, I appreciate you bringing up that comment because, Doc, when you're talking about reparations for the survivors, the victims, the descendants, like now we're talking about getting into the nuts and bolts of how this is going to happen, whether it's coming from a state level or whether it's coming from the federal level. What would be the course of action that the state of Oklahoma or the United States government would have to take if it's decided upon that, yes, they are allowed to get reparations?
Well, I have, and this is not an endorsement, but DeMario Solomon Simmons is one of the best litigators on reparations existing right now. He has covered all the bases. His mentor was Johnny Cochran and Charles Ogletree. He knows that there's a potential because I've had people ask me about the reparations. Well, these people may not be around in a couple of years. What's going to happen to the money? Look, DeMario got this under control, and just like we know, we have to trust what he's doing right now, and he's making sure that none of that happens. He is on the case.
And that's one of the big things that I think that people are looking at, Doc and Nikhil, because people are trying to figure out, okay, if this goes through, then this might set the precedent for other racial incidents that have occurred on American soil by white people, by other people against Black people. This will open up a Pandora's box, Doc.
I will say this: the mayor is saying, like, although he's made it seem like he's stressing that this is something that he cares about, the problem is that he's also saying that, okay, well, it's not fair to charge the descendants of those that happened before because this is 100 years ago. How can we charge them tax-wise and all those things? So, and that's been a problem with reparations for a long time. It's like, okay, well, I didn't do it. I wasn't here, but you benefited from it. You killed our wealth in the process. So we have every right to come after the wealth that you were able to benefit from, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And we have to remember that very, very radical left-wing president, Ronald Reagan, gave reparations to Japanese Americans.
Yes.
In 1988, 40-something odd years prior, for an incident. The idea of reparations, America has recognized that it owes something to people it has wronged. Even Abraham Lincoln said, after us being enslaved for 250 years, saying, we've got to give them 40 acres and a mule. So people recognize that historical injustices have to be rectified by current generations. And this is what the reparations lawsuit in Oklahoma is all about.
Absolutely. Doc, I know we this conversation is an ongoing discussion, but is there anything that you would recommend that we keep our eyes on as it relates to this case? And I know the last time you were on, you were saying that the state of New York is looking to bring together a commission as well, like we saw in California. You know, what's the update with that as well?
Well, the update with that is that Governor Cuomo is no longer in power, and we're trying, you know, it's again how. Well, don't let me get started, but let me put it this way. Keep an eye on New York. We're still working on it. Roger Wareham, an attorney and a good friend of mine, he is still working to get that under the new governor. Definitely keep your eyes on the California lawsuit, which we lost a couple of weeks ago in terms of how they voted this whole lineage stuff, which is you know about ADOS. So I would say, and of course, the Tulsa case as well. Those are the three that I'm looking at right now.
All right. Dr. Ray Winbush, who serves as the director of the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University. He's an author. He's a scholar. Doc, we always appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Keep up the good work. You too.
Nice meeting you.
All right.